So, Anna, you wrote a very long piece last week.
I wrote a I want to say it's 11,000 or 12,000 word piece. Yes, unfortunately. Hopefully it's not hopefully it is more fun to read than it was to write. It took a long time, but I think it was worth it.
And there are many comic aspects of this piece, and we may touch on some of them, and we have in various other formats. But I actually want to spend this conversation entirely on the serious aspects of this. So if we had to remove all the elements that were theatrics and comical from the 11,000 words, how many words are serious?
There are a lot of serious words, Ben. It's a very substantive piece, though it is I think someone described it as in a comedic and whimsical wrapper. But look, this is ultimately at its core a piece that is substantive. It is about the appointments clause, and it's about other litigation as well that is going on surrounding the dismantling of the federal government by DOGE. Uh, and then it's also about how Justice Department attorneys are representing themselves in court, and we'll get into all of that, I'm sure. But it at its core very much is trying to get at revealing this question or series of questions and trying to really express why these questions are important as they relate to that litigation and those aspects of that litigation.
Okay, we're only going to do this once, and then we're just going to use the phrase. What does WITAOD stand for?
WITTO means who is the administrator of DOGE. It is a question, as I said, that is a proxy for a series of questions that is trying to get at, who is in charge of DOGE, what is the chain of command at DOGE, what is its organizational structure. It is something that has, from the very beginning, been kind of unclear. Those series of questions think back to what happened on day one of Trump's presidency, or even before that. There was all this talk around DOGE, this organization that's going to be named after a meme coin. There were questions surrounding, like, okay, it's going to be led by Elon
Wait,
Musk.
named after a meme coin, which is in turn named after a dog.
Yeah, and a dog that's a meme. I don't know. I don't like it's very silly, right? And it's because Elon Musk thought that it'd be funny to name this organization after a meme and a meme coin. And back in November, we get this official announcement from Trump that this Department of Government Efficiency, as it's known, even though it's not really a federal department, would be led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who, by the time inauguration rolls around, is no longer a part of Doge. But it's kind of unclear exactly what Doge is going to be. At first, it seems like, based on reporting and then also Trump's own statements, it's going to maybe be a federal advisory committee, so a group of kind of outside advisors who are, just giving recommendations. And then on day one of Trump's presidency, he issues an executive order, and we're all a little bit surprised because the way that they did it, and it actually kind of got to hand it to them that it is a little bit clever. What they did instead was take a already existing entity within the executive office of the president, known formerly as the United States Digital Service, and they rebranded it. They gave it a new name, the United States DOGE Service.
Super clever. Found a federal component with USD service, and you just change what the D stands for, and you've got a Doge. Yeah.
Yeah. And right, and so now you've got the United States Doge Service, but it wasn't just that they changed the name. Like, look, the United States Digital Service was focused, yes, on technological innovation. People, I think, popularly have identified it with fixing the healthcare site, but it did a lot more than that. There were things that the U.S. Digital Service did that does kind of overlap with the way that some people, some of the projects that DOGE has apparently engaged with. But in this executive order, there's like a bunch of other things that they give DOGE the responsibility for, right? Like, they, in addition to this software modernization aspect of it all, they also want DOGE to have access to all this unclassified information within agencies. And then there's all these other executive orders that come up where the United States DOGE Service and its administrator will be responsible for consulting on hiring plans and firing plans and all of these other things. And so it seems like the US Digital Service has been fully transformed into something else. And a part of that, too, is that there's this figure known as the administrator that is described in the executive orders that rebrand the US Digital Service into DOGE. The administrator, like I said, is the kind of the person who's supposed to be consulting with the agency's heads, is in, leading the U.S. DOGE service. Also is kind of a liaison with these DOGE teams that will be established within each agency. And then finally also heads a subcomponent of the U.S. DOGE service, which is known as the U.S. DOGE Temporary Organization. So it basically is kind of, the leader, the head of DOGE. And you would think, Ben, that the person who fills that role would be the person who has publicly been identified throughout months, leading up to the inauguration as the person who's the head of DOGE. But as DOGE starts doing its work, as we get weeks into Trump's presidency, the White House is being very unclear and resistant to questions about what Elon Musk's employment status is and who the actual administrator of DOGE is. And so that's kind of where this question started, and it really snowballed from there because, as I've mentioned, it became kind of a stand-in for this broader inquiry as it relates to DOGE and its chain of command and its organizational structure.
All right. So help me out. Why is the question important in the sense that Trump's allowed to do the things that DOGE does, or he's not, and he's allowed to take advice from anybody he wants, including Elon Musk. So what does it matter how DOGE is structured, and what does it matter whether Elon Musk or somebody else is formally the administrator?
Yeah, so it matters for a few reasons. Let's start with the question about what does it matter how DOGE is structured. So one thing that the executive orders kind of set out in creating or rebranding the U.S. DOGE service is that they all kind of seem to suggest that DOGE has this advisory kind of role, right? That's how they're structuring it. Of course, they're structuring it within the executive office of the president. The United States Digital Service actually used to be, when it was still the United States Digital Service, used to be under OMB. They kind of disaggregated it from OMB and made it its own thing, but they're still saying that it's solely just an advisory body, and the executive orders, if you're following just the letter of those orders, they certainly suggest that. And one reason that this is interesting is because it seems really disconnected from just the reality of the situation, which is that it certainly seems like DOGE is not just an advisory body. It's going out and doing things like ordering the mass firings of federal employees. It's dismantling agencies. It is doing things that really do not seem to be advisory, and this relates to some of the litigation that we're seeing that came up within the first few weeks of DOGE really getting started doing its work, which relates to FOIA and this question about, what whether DOGE is subject to FOIA. And in those cases, the government has said, oh, well, DOGE is just an advisory body. It's within the executive office of the president. And typically those types of entities, that's a confidential kind of thing between the president and his advisors. And if it's just advisory, then it's not subject to FOIA. It's instead subject to the Presidential Records Act, which, we want to get any of those records that they would have to preserve until years and years down the line if it is just subject to the PRA. But a CREW, Good Government Organization, Government Accountability Organization, filed suit arguing that no, DOGE is subject to FOIA. And a part of that litigation involves this question of whether DOGE is an agency subject to FOIA, and to show that DOGE is an agency, this involves this question of whether or not DOGE exercises independent, significant authority. And so the structure of DOGE really matters, and what DOGE is really doing organizationally matters for that reason as it relates to that litigation. Then there's the other big question about why DOGE's leader matters. And I think that this is really one of the key points, and it relates to the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. Within the first few weeks, as DOGE got to work dismantling agencies and firing federal employees en masse, we saw some Appointments Clause litigation come up. And in those cases, what's really in play is this question of whether or not Elon Musk, or if it's not Elon Musk, whoever is leading DOGE, whether the leader of DOGE was properly appointed. And because the Appointments Clause, of course, Ben, as you know, is a clause of the Constitution that basically makes it such that these things called offices, government offices, that are occupied by people who wield positions of significant authority and power within the government, they have to be properly appointed pursuant to the Appointments Clause. So it's Congress's job to create these offices, and then it's the president's job to fill them. And when the president fills these offices, it has to be in compliance with the methods set out in the Constitution. And so you have these people named officers. Again, those are the people who, as the Supreme Court has said, wield significant and continuing authority within the government. They're distinct from people who are, just mere employees, who are maybe less powerful. But generally, somebody like a principal officer, which is one of the types of officers that you can be, there are two types, is someone like a cabinet head, who, really just wields a lot of power within the government. And they have to be appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. There's also a second category of kind of less powerful, but still powerful people known as inferior officers. And generally the default rule is the same. If you're an inferior officer, generally nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, but they also have different alternative routes for being appointed if Congress allows for one of those alternative routes. So that's kind of the gist of what officers are and what the Appointments Clause requires. And with DOGE, you kind of have this question where you've got someone in charge of DOGE that seems to be very powerful, seems to be directing agency action, seems to have the ability to order agency heads to do certain things. That's a really powerful job within government. It seems like the kind of thing that means that person would be an officer of the United States. And yet, A, we don't really know who it is because early on, it wasn't clear who it was. And then B, that person has not been nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate as the appointments clause would require. And so a number of different litigants have brought cases arguing that Elon Musk is the de facto leader of DOGE. And because he's leading DOGE without having been through the proper appointments process, then his continuing to wield that power violates the Constitution. And that many of DOGE's actions as a result are ultra virus and should be void.
If Trump wanted to do this in a bulletproof fashion, as you're describing it, it seems to me he would do one of three things. One is actually make DOGE genuinely advisory. It can go in, it can gather information, and then it can make recommendations to either the president or the cabinet secretaries, but it can't take action by itself, right? That would be bulletproof. The second bulletproof option would be to constitute an office in statute that had actual executive power delineated in statute, for which the leader, the administrator, would probably have to be nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And then you could presumably give it any powers over the executive branch that you wanted, right?
Right. I think that's right.
And it seems to me what they've done is a third option, which is doing the second, but dressing it up as the first, which is to say in court, you say this is all advisory, but in fact, you have a agency, a person who is wielding substantial authority over the agencies, ordering hirings and firings, and that sort of thing. But you're not acknowledging it, and then you're obfuscating what that person's actual role is.
Right. And I think that that last part is the thing I would add is it's not just that you're taking two or you're saying you're doing one, but you're really kind of doing two without going through the appointments process. It's also that the person who is wielding this power, you're saying that they're not actually wielding this power because you're saying they're not the ones who is formally occupying this role. At least that's what your line in court is. And much of this piece that I wrote is about how there's this divide between what the administration was saying publicly about Elon Musk's role, in which they were saying over and over and over again that he's overseeing DOGE, he's leading DOGE, that he's the head of DOGE. I mean, you have all of these statements by the president himself saying these things. But you have the president's press secretary saying these things. You have all these people saying these things about Elon Musk being in charge. You have Elon Musk himself acting like he's in charge, saying that he's in charge. And then you have Justice Department attorneys. You have White House officials who are making declarations, swearing that he has no official role in DOGE, that he is not an employee of DOGE, that he is not the administrator of DOGE. And so you have this issue where the public line is just drastically different from the line in court. And that brings me to another reason why this WITAOD question was important, which is that it raises questions about the ethical duty that lawyers have to, not mislead the court, to be candid with the court, because what we've seen over and over and over again around this question, who is the administrator of DOGE or who is leading DOGE, is that there is that gap between the public line and then the official line in court.
Yeah, so I want to bore in on the question, if the theory of the case, and we're going to get to whether the theory of the case is simply a lie, but the administration's theory is DOGE is purely advisory. Why does it then matter if Elon Musk is the administrator of DOGE? Why not just concede, okay, yeah, he runs the DOGE service, but he doesn't exercise any executive power because it's just advisory. Why go through the extra step of denying? What work is that extra step of denying that he is the administrator of DOGE? What is it doing?
Well, look, part of it might be that Elon Musk's role was as a special government employee. That is typically a kind of short-term status that one has within the federal government. There's, rules around you can only work 130, I think it is, out of 365 days. Typically, it's kind of a role that is given to people who are experts, but they work in another field. And they kind of are coming in to give expert consulting or advice to the government. Honestly, typically there are very similar ethics rules that special government employees are supposed to follow, although my understanding is that it's sometimes in a less stringent way than there would be in other circumstances. Of course, there's been lots of questions about Elon Musk's conflicts of interest and whether he is following all of the ethics rules that apply to government employees. And so one reason why you might be reluctant to name Elon Musk as the administrator of DOGE might have something to do with some of those ethics questions about whether he can be the administrator of DOGE formally and officially, and also still maintain his other interest in his companies and SpaceX and Tesla, all those private interests that he has. I will also just say, in terms of a kind of double layer of protection, let's say the government isn't so sure that this whole DOGE is just advisory thing is going to fly with the courts. Denying that Elon Musk has an official role at DOGE is also still useful, both to shield potentially his communication. Like, let's say, for example, the FOIA litigation doesn't quite pan out and a court decides that, DOGE is an agency subject to FOIA. Well, if Elon Musk doesn't have an official role at DOGE and he is just a special government employee advisor to the president that's totally separate, then you might still be able to shield some of his communications that you might not want to be public, even if you lose your FOIA litigation. So there are things like that. And then in the appointments clause stuff, one reason why you don't want Elon Musk to formally be the administrator of DOGE, again, if the courts don't buy the whole DOGE is just advising thing, you don't want it to be so easy as to just have, oh, well, Elon Musk is the head of DOGE. One of the things that we've seen in these cases is that this question around whether Elon is the head of DOGE is particularly important to one prong of the appointments clause litigation that relates to this question about whether or not someone is serving as an officer. And that is the question about whether the person is holds a continuing position in government. And so what continuing means is just like something that is not personal to the person. Like, it's not a position that is just for Elon Musk. Like, it's something that Elon Musk could be appointed to it, or Ben Wittes could be appointed to it. And when you think about what the administrator of DOGE is as a position, like, you could be appointed to it, I could be appointed to it, or Elon Musk could be appointed to it. And you kind of want to close off this idea that someone holds a continuing position. And one way that you might do that is by saying that they're just, a temporary presidential advisor, as opposed to the administrator who there's going to be a next one after that.
So the administration's answer to this, which is that DOGE's functions are purely advisory. And in any event, Elon, who clearly is not now the administrator of DOGE, given what he's been tweeting.
Well, yeah, you're right.
Never was. And the administrator of DOGE is this woman, Ms. Gleason, who no one had ever heard of before. And so DOGE's role is purely advisory. And Elon is just a presidential advisor. That is the position they've taken in court, as I understand it. I take it you think it is at least somewhat clear that that is not true.
Right. I mean, look, it's yes, they do have this person, Amy Gleason, who used to work at the United States Digital Service, then went to work for Brad Smith, who is one of Musk's top lieutenants at DOGE. And then was publicly named after weeks of, speculation and questioning from reporters about who the administrator of DOGE is. Lo and behold, Amy Gleason is named as the administrator of DOGE. There are certainly things that, though, don't seem to fit with her having any real authority at DOGE. And that's really the question here, is like, maybe Amy Gleason is the official acting administrator of DOGE on paper, but what you're really getting at is, who really was pulling the strings, who was calling the shots at DOGE at these relevant, very critical time periods, like when USAID was dismantled, because that's the subject of one of the appointments clause cases. And like, one reason why it seems like Amy Gleason didn't have real authority, for one thing, the president was saying that even after she was appointed, I mean, quite literally saying things. I signed an executive order and I put a man named Elon Musk in charge. That's clearly a reference to the executive order that established the United States DOGE service. Then you have depositions, for example, in which there's this really careful parsing of language by DOGE representatives. In one case, a woman named Kendall Lindman was deposed as a 30B6 witness, which is a witness who is representing kind of the institutional entity of DOGE. And when questioned about Amy Gleason's role and about Amy Gleason's interactions with other people at DOGE, Kendall Lindman repeatedly said very carefully things like, Amy Gleason has formal authority over Steve Davis, over, whoever else is at DOGE. So it's this very careful parsing of language that is in other examples in the filings as well, in which the government takes this really formalist perspective, in which they are trying to argue that the only thing that matters is what is on paper in the executive orders, or when it comes to the administrator, whose name is on the paper as the administrator. But what the courts are looking at here, for the most part, is, well, how are things operating in practice? Of course, it's relevant what the executive orders say and who the administrator is on paper. but courts have not really thus far accepted this very formalist perspective that the government is putting forward, whether it's in the Appointments Clause litigation or most recently in this FOIA litigation, in which they want the courts only to look at the language of the executive orders and then who the kind of formal occupier of the administrator office is.
And what's the court's alternative to that? I mean, it does seem a little bit odd if the president identifies Amy Gleason as the administrator of DOGE to say, no, we don't believe you. We think the real administrator of DOGE is Elon Musk.
Well, but Ben, I think like to push back on that a little bit, look, if you're taking really seriously the idea that the president's statements matter, well, you have examples of the president saying that Elon Musk is in charge, right? And so, yeah, you do have some conflicting evidence, and one of the questions for the court, especially at the district court level, will be resolving this factual dispute about who it is that is the real administrator of DOGE. And we do have some early examples of courts trying to resolve this question, but a lot of this litigation is at a very early pre-discovery phase. We haven't yet gotten to discovery, but at least one judge did find, as a factual matter at the district court level, in deciding a preliminary injunction, found that Elon Musk was acting as the de facto administrator of DOGE at the time that certain actions to dismantle USAID were taken. That preliminary injunction was then appealed by the government up to the Fourth Circuit, a 3-judge panel on the Fourth Circuit. 2 of them disagreed with Judge Chuang, and essentially, it was a bit unusual in that typically appeals courts aren't reviewing the factual determinations of the district court, but they took issue with Judge Chuang's reliance on things like news reports, and essentially said, no, Elon Musk is a senior advisor to the president, and so therefore, we don't think that he was leading DOGE. But ultimately, Ben, this is this is a factual question that the courts are going to have to look at. And we just have not yet gotten to a stage where there's any, real fact finding that's based on discovery that the parties have gotten, in part because the government has fought tooth and nail to avoid discovery, that the preliminary discovery that judges have ordered thus far.
Now, how does Musk's break with the president affect all this? So your article stops the day that Musk leaves. But in the few days since then, he has, today, this is Tuesday as we record, the 3rd, he has tweeted denouncing the big, beautiful bill. He seems to be picking fights with the president. What if Elon Musk comes out and gives a deposition that says, or an affidavit that says, yeah, I was the administrator of DOGE. I mean, we called Amy Gleason the administrator of DOGE, but guess what? I was actually in charge. Does the formalism yield to that?
I mean, it seems like it should, right? It seems like that would be really detrimental to the litigation position of the Justice Department and the Trump administration. Again, it depends in part on whether the courts accept this really formalist posture that the government is urging it to take in terms of just looking at the language of the executive orders and who is on paper the administrator. But yeah, I mean, Elon Musk certainly could do some damage to the litigation positions of the government by saying something to that effect. I will say, though, even if he doesn't, this question, who is the administrator of DOGE, it's not just who it is now, right? So even if Elon Musk is out of government, the backward looking question of who was the administrator of DOGE at the time that these actions were being taken will continue to be relevant as we go through this litigation in likely years to come, potentially, as the courts litigate these appointments clause cases, as there are other cases related to DOGE and its chain of command that are litigated. So this question isn't going anywhere just because Elon Musk is leaving government.
And why does it stick around? Like, why, if the answer is Elon or not Elon, why does the question survive the resolution of the not Elon question?
Well, I mean, so as I said, one reason being that these cases, it's kind of like you're looking back at who was in charge at the time these actions were taken, right? So who actually shut down the USAID building? That happened in end of January, early February. So even if Elon's gone, there's a retrospective aspect to it all where you're looking back to ask who was in charge. And then going forward, of course, like, even if Elon Musk is gone and now Elon Musk is saying he's not in charge of DOGE, he's finally on the same page as the government, who says that he's technically not in charge of DOGE. But then that raises the question of like, well, who is in charge of DOGE? Is it Amy Gleason? Seems like probably not. And if DOGE is going to continue to act the way it has in the past, then you still have an appointments clause issue that isn't personal to Elon Musk.
And you still want to know who to hold responsible, right, politically accountable for things that it does that you might not approve of.
Right. And I also will add as well that, even though we're sitting here assuming that everyone is being forthright about what Elon Musk's role will be in the future, that he is saying that he's not a part of DOGE, it does seem like that now maybe is the case because of the tension between Trump and Musk that has kind of come into public view. But at the same time, there's been so many contradictory statements about this, Ben. I mean, the very day that Musk announced that his time as a special government employee was coming to an end, the vice president went on TV that night and said, "Oh, no, he's going to continue advising. He'll always, be around." And then the next day, when there's a goodbye party, Trump said, "DOGE is his baby. He'll continue to advise." So it's really just unclear in all of these instances, like, what can you take at face value and what is actually going on? So there's this, multiple kind of reasons why this question will continue to be relevant.
All right. How did you get interested in this question?
Well, being Lawfare's intrepid reporter in the courts, I think that I got interested in this question, one, because, as I mentioned, it arose in a lot of the litigation that we're covering. But two, it largely had to do with the disconnect that I was seeing between the public statements that were being made, and then I would go to court for a hearing, and judges would point blank ask Justice Department attorneys, who is in charge of DOGE, or what is DOGE's chain of command, or how is any of this working? And Justice Department attorneys wouldn't be able to answer, or eventually, once it became clear that the official party line was that Amy Gleason was in charge, would say that Amy Gleason is in charge, even when the president was out in public saying things like Elon Musk is the head of DOGE or Elon is in charge. And as someone who, thinks that it's really important for attorneys to abide by their duty of candor and their ethical responsibilities, I think that that's one reason why I started focusing on it, because I was watching to see how the attorneys in court would react as these facts in the public realm became much more complicated for them to, continue to have this legal position that Elon Musk wasn't in charge.
As we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation is a serious version of something that in the piece you wrapped in a very light wrapper. And the discussion, the piece itself has a very comic flavor to it. And I'm wondering what about it lent that air of absurdity that caused you to treat it that way.
I mean, look, so much of Doge kind of makes you feel a little bit like you're living in a, like an Adam McKay, like The Big Short and meets The Social Network meets, I don't know, something just completely absurd. It all felt very surreal anyway, because you have this cast of, 20-something-year-old people who are being given access to things that usually only career government officials have access to, that are being tasked with dismantling these federal agencies that are responsible for, in many cases, life-saving services. And so there's this absurd element to Doge anyway. And then you have, the tech billionaire who's allegedly in charge of it all. So there's kind of this already background absurdity to it all. And then you have this element to it where it's like, you can't even the people who are defending these actions in court can't even tell you who's in charge of it all. And it just felt like I was living in this kind of Kafkaesque, just absurd situation. At one point after a hearing in New York, I ran up to an attorney who was leaving court who had just been representing the government defending the actions of Doge. And I said, "Who is the administrator of Doge?" And he, throws back, "I don't know the answer to that." And then, gets in a car, rides off into the New York haze. And it just felt like I was a character on this quest. And sometimes you just couldn't help but find it's because it's not a funny story, but you couldn't help but find that there was something so absurd about it that you just kind of had to make it into a comedy. And because it just kept going and going and going and going every single day, there would be some new evidence to suggest one way or the other who the administrator of Doge was. And it felt like the way to get people interested in it was to make it funny.
So tell me about the reaction to it. So you created this slightly unhinged persona who is obsessed with this question, WITAOD, and to some extent you really lived the bit.
I said at one point, first I was performatively going insane. Now I'm actually going insane.
Right. And it all has a vaguely kind of Bridget Jones Diary quality, except instead of searching for a romantic life, you're searching for the administrator of Doge. But I do. So talk to us a little bit about what the reaction to reporting this story, which has this very serious set of issues underneath it, in this highly comical, performative way, that, at some level takes the issue very seriously, but at some level acknowledges the absurdity of the situation. What was the reaction to it?
I look, the reaction has been fantastic to it. I think that people, like, again, this is a very serious subject, but I think that people, if they have to read about something this serious, it helps that to entertain. And I think that people have really appreciated that there's something about it that's both informative and entertaining, and that they get a laugh at least. You know, if and if I can make people get to the end of a 12,000 word piece by making them laugh, then I think that that's a success.
We're not trying to scare the listener off here when we say 12,000 words. Just start at the beginning, and if you're not laughing, stop.
Or take it in like as like a serial. You know, you can get like into a few days of the diary and then stop and then come back to it. But you know, I think too, Ben, one reason why the reaction to it has been what it's been is that it took this piece, it took me about 3 months to write it, because so many things kept happening every single day that I had to add to the diary. But also during that time, you know, for our listeners who don't follow me online, like on Blue Sky or Twitter or whatever, every single day I would be kind of actually living, like, the things that were happening in the piece were actually things that were happening, because even though it's a kind of put on persona that I have in the piece, I really was making an internet movement out of it, so to speak, because I was talking about it all the time. I was making jokes about it all the time. There's now a group of people who, you know, will call themselves the WITODlings. And there's even one guy who like put WITOD on a protest sign. There are people who will like write WITOD and have their dogs take pictures with it. And it's like, it really was kind of becoming a movement of tens of people, which we joke about in the piece, but it really did become a thing. And so I think that people reacted to it in a way, that in the way that they did, because it'd been building and building and building.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting dimension. And one of the interesting dimensions of that is how the court action interacts with the building movement. So, you know, you start frenetically tweeting, who is the administrator of DOGE, who is the administrator of DOGE, who is the administrator of DOGE. And the next thing you know, judges are asking, who is the administrator of DOGE? And I'm wondering if you have any sense of to what extent that's just that the judges were being driven crazy by the same question that you were being driven crazy by. And to what extent do you think there were judges who were secret WITODlings?
Well, look, I can't speak to whether or not there are any federal judges who have intentionally joined the WITOD movement. Of course, they probably identified these issues as I did early on. But I will say, Ben, that we have, as I say in the piece, whether they know it or not, there have been at least 3 federal judges who have joined the WITOD movement. And by that, I mean, these are federal judges who, around shortly after the time that I started really talking about this question a lot, a number of federal judges started asking and really like zeroing in on the same question.
But you have no evidence that they didn't, like, you know, follow you on Twitter first.
I know they did not, as far as I'm aware, no. But what I will say, I do know, because I had a number of reporters call me and talk to me, you know, off the record or on background about this question when I started talking about it online a lot. And they were just calling to try to understand why this was an important question and why I was going on and on about it. So I do know that there were, mainstream press reporters who started asking this question and started focusing on it because we were talking about it so much. And then some of those same reporters ended up being reporters who, in the White House press briefing room, like would ask the question. And so I do know that there was some type of influence, I think, because, we started talking about this question so much that it started becoming more of a thing. Whether that would have happened anyway, I mean, probably, because it's a very important question, the legal cases. But I think the Witoadlings, in my mind, I like to think the Witoadlings had something to do with it.
Now that he is out of government, are you going to contact Elon and ask him, were you the administrator of DOGE? Because I think like, a sort of debrief interview with Elon in retrospect, do you think you were the administrator of DOGE, is an important coda to the story.
Ben, if there is anyone out there who can get me an interview with Elon Musk, I would be overjoyed to sit down with the suspected former administrator of DOGE and ask him if he really was the administrator of DOGE. I do have his government email address, but I don't have unfortunately, I do not have Elon Musk's contact information. So
just tweet at him.
Yeah. Well, I did ask him. I've asked him multiple times on Twitter with no response. He did tweet something yesterday to the effect of, who is in charge at CNN, in reference to some CNN interview he was unhappy with. And so my reply to him was,
who is in charge at the United States DOGE service?
Exactly. So I'm still waiting, Ben.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
we'll see.
Elon, if you're listening, please come on the Lawfare Podcast to discuss whether you were ever the administrator of DOGE with Anna Bauer. We promise you a fair hearing on all claims, and I think you'll find it a good format. Anna Bauer, you're a great American. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much.